Doug, good to see you. Thanks for taking some time to talk with me today about the REACH program and your experience in a couple of different roles with REACH and your vision for it going forward. As a first topic of conversation, I know you've been involved with REACH since 2010, and I'd love to hear more about how you got involved with the program and what inspired you to do work with REACH.
Well, on some level, I think I've always known I wanted to do work with something like the REACH program. Specifically, my path to being an educator kind of started, I think, in high school and college, and just loving the classes I was in, thinking about educational access, and my own personal story. My family, very much a working class Brooklyn family. My mother was a nurse, my father worked a bunch of jobs, ended up working for the MTA. Neither of them, I think, had the traditional sort of 4-year college experience. So I knew I wanted to do something that involved, I wanted to work in Brooklyn specifically, and working with what we call sort of an underserved population. I fully intended to be a public school educator, actually. My arriving in Jesuit education again was a complete accident. I was in grad school around the time of the New York City teacher hiring freeze, and my grandmother found an ad in the New York Times for a teaching position at Regis, and it mentioned something about the REACH program. I was really only dimly aware of what it was and kind of learned more about it through the interview process. But yeah, I was a young kid coming out of college and grad school and threw my hat in the ring and kind of ended up at the REACH program a little bit by accident, by chance, and very grateful that I did.
Am I right? Were you the first math dean?
I was the first dean of any variety. Well, I guess other than the dean of students. Yeah, I was the first. The dean of math position was created. REACH did a strategic planning process after its first 10 years, and it's funny. I think they realized after a decade, hey, we don't have a math person. We probably should. So they created, the position was originally called Math Curriculum Coordinator. And when I applied, I assumed they wouldn't hire a new teacher for that position. So I started that role and kind of built up that role over about 5 years, and then eventually they added an equivalent position in English Language Arts.
And those deans, tell us a little bit more about those roles and what they look like practically, in terms of curriculum at REACH, teaching at REACH, and then there's a Regis component to it as well. So it's a lot for one person to wrap their mind around.
It's funny because we're hiring for a new math dean these days, so I think about what goes into the dean position a lot. It's a tough job to hire for because the hats you have to wear. We're looking for someone who wants to do middle, high, teaching math or teaching English, Saturdays, summers, and then also during the year. They teach a few sections at the high school level, and then they help out as an administrator, and that may be advising families, that may be helping with our own admissions process, just planning for events. It's sort of like an assistant principal job, a classroom teacher, and a department chair, all wrapped into one, and it helps if you speak Spanish. Just a very reasonable job position to put out there and see who's out there. But it's exciting work, and so we've been very lucky with the folks that we have gotten, and a lot of folks, I think, grow into the different responsibilities in the role, as I think was the case for me and I think for you as well.
That's right. No, I love being REACH Dean of ELA for a couple of years, and I think the analogy to being an assistant principal is a really good one, right? Like a teaching assistant principal, one that has administrative roles for the program, but also classroom teaching roles. And I enjoyed, actually, at that point in my career, the difference, having the opportunity to do a little bit of both classroom teaching and leadership kind of work. So you've been REACH director of the REACH program for less than a year now, right? So you're in year one, and you've remarked to me before that leaving the classroom and becoming being in a leadership role, that's a big move.
Yeah.
What has that been like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I ask myself that question a lot when I'm traveling into work. I think it's a different skill set that's required. One thing that's been interesting, and I think in a good way, challenging for me, is transferring sort of the skills that you need as a classroom teacher, and then utilizing them in terms of managing a team, interacting more with families, recruiting, and recruiting not just families, but also staff for the summers, for the Saturdays, and for full-time positions. So, I definitely miss the classroom. I think when I went into education, it was to be a classroom teacher, and I love interacting with the kids. The one thing that's nice about the REACH Director job is that I still have a lot of on-the-ground interaction with kids. I lead our chapel services on Saturday mornings and during the summers. This past summer, I got a chance to still be a classroom teacher. I don't think that will be the case going forward, but at least for my sleep. But there's so many times where I get to be on the front lines because we're still a pretty small program in the grand scheme of things, that it kind of satisfies my hunger to work directly with families and with kids. So it's been a transition. It's not the same job at all, but it's a new skill set. But I get to still kind of use some of the old tricks, so to speak, from my own position.
That makes a lot of sense, and you know, I think that as an institution, we're lucky to have you in the role since you have a long history with the program. You have the teaching background and the administrative background to all bring to the work that you do now. So on chapel, I know that singing is part of REACH Chapel. REACH
You're not going to get me to sing on camera.
Wasn't going to ask, but you do lead the kids in song?
I do, yeah. It was funny, I almost imagined during the interview process what would a real interview process look like, by which I mean an interview process that actually asked you to do all the things that I knew I would have to do as director. So I thought there should have been a part where I had to do my rendition of This Little Light of Mine, a part where I had to take a child to a hospital unexpectedly, and a part where I had to lead a hike in the woods. It would have been an atypical interview experience.
All the while teaching math at two different levels.
Yeah, exactly, right. And speaking in English and Spanish on Saturdays to families. I actually kind of love singing with the kids. I'm not a musician by any stretch of the imagination, but it's fun, and it's sort of a great way to show the kids. We talk all the time about being open to growth, and I think the best way I can do that is by sort of being this big, goofy guy who's not afraid to get up in front of 100 middle schoolers at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning and sing a gospel song. It's a good experience, and it's definitely that's something every Saturday morning I actually look forward to these days.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
When I think back to my own time being in Scranton with the REACH program, those moments in Madonna della Strada Chapel, with all the kids singing, with the collegians and counselors leading us, those are really great memories for me, and I'm sure they're great memories for the students too.
Yeah, we brought back an old song. Do you remember the Johnny Appleseed song?
I do.
That was a Brian Daly classic. We brought that back this summer. Those are often the highlight for me, is like big group activities that are kind of campy, but kind of unique to REACH culture as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So thinking about the summer a little bit, the REACH summer, those 6 weeks, 3 of them residential, 3 of them back here at REACH are really core to the experience. What do you think has made those summers over the last 17 years of the program really impactful and effective? And as you think about the future of the program, what are some of your ideas about how to evolve that summer program in the ways that you and your team are considering?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big question. So when I try to describe the summer, I find myself often trying to explain what I do to outsiders and folks that aren't that familiar with the REACH program. And the key thing to understand, right, we're taking 150 middle schoolers, we're taking 100 of them to Pennsylvania, another 50 of them to Fordham, at Fordham Prep. And they're staying with us 24 hours. So that means we are basically mom, dad, teacher, we are caregiver in all senses of that word, for an entire 3-week period. So it's intense. It's intense for the staff, it's intense for the kids. They're very young. Very often it's the first time they're away from home. And I think that the magic of the summer happens because of how intense that experience is. I don't know that REACH would be anywhere near as successful as we are. When you look statistically or anecdotally in any of those ways, if we did not take the kids with us. And that residential experience is key because it requires such a high level of buy-in from the families. And it offers us an opportunity to work with the kids in sort of an all-inclusive way, in a really holistic way. And so we get to work with a kid from the moment he gets up to the moment he goes to bed. It's like, what does it mean to live your life according to these principles that we espouse? What does it mean to eat breakfast this way? What does it mean to organize your backpack at the end of a long day of classes? What does it mean to play in recreation with your friends to the fullest of your ability, but in a way that supports and affirms your classmates? And by the way, I don't mean to suggest that we need to teach these kids because they don't know any of that, a lot of times they bring these values and these skills already, and what we're doing is we're supplementing and we're affirming and we're strengthening a skill set that they and their families already possess. But it's that almost like retreat aspect to it, where you go away into the wilderness of Scranton, Pennsylvania, not to offend the fine denizens of Scranton, Pennsylvania, for a 3-week period, and then you come back to your normal environment, and now you're ready to take what you've learned and to take what you've experienced and really put it to work in your day-to-day life. And that's plugging into a tradition that we've used in Jesuit education for a really long time. And I think that's, I don't know whether the folks who originally designed the program were thinking of it as a retreat experience, but that's very much the way that I've come to understand it now. When I think about where do we need to go, specifically vis-a-vis the summer experience, I have a lot of thoughts. I've often wondered what could we accomplish with a 4th summer. Right before high school, I think that's a big question for us. I think we're thinking about, we have 2 sites now, and we're thinking about how can we leverage better communication between those 2 sites. One thing that I think, I don't want to say we lose, but a difference is, in the old model, we used to have everybody at Scranton. So a 6th grader got to look up to an 8th grader and say, here's what it means to be a successful REACH student. And now they have to kind of wait till we come back together at Regis to see that. And but it is 2020, so there are ways for us to accomplish that goal, maybe without being in the same site. I'm always thinking in general about, how can our curriculum better align to the work that they'll need to do in high school? How can we utilize every moment of time and make sure that the families and kids are getting the feedback during that short window that they're going to need to grow over the next 2 years? It's an ongoing process, and it's a never-ending process, I think, to sharpen that and make that, as high efficiency as we can be and as productive as we can be.
That all makes sense. Yeah, and those are great goals for the program looking forward. And when I reflect on my own time being involved in the summers, one of the things that really sticks with me is how critical the other adults on campus are, and not only the teachers that you hire, but also the collegians, the college-aged students who really are with their group truly 24/7, living in the dorms with them, and the counselors that support the teachers. And many of those counselors and collegians, from teaching them at REACH. Many of them are REACH alumni, some of them are Regis alumni. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to interact with former students in those different contexts when they're helping you at camp as employees or as TAs? Those are very different.
Makes me feel old, I'll tell you that. This is the first year where I have someone on staff working as an AMP mentor sort of throughout the year who I taught at REACH and at Regis. Esteban, yep.
Yeah.
And so that was a real kind of groundbreaking moment for me, where now, not only do I know the vast majority of employees. If you're a REACH graduate and you're in college, I know who you are, and that's kind of a crazy thing to be able to say. So it's a pretty cool experience to see, kids who you met when they were 11 or 12, and to have them now, be role models and be influencing and be inspiring kids who are looking to go to Regis or looking to go to Xavier. The work that I see a lot of our alumni do on the ground is incredibly powerful. One thing I often say to our staff is that kind of the further I get in age from our REACH students, in a sense, the less power I have in terms of inspiring and influencing them. I don't think that's always true, but I think in some senses it can be. And even though maybe I have a master's in math ed, I have all this experience, but it's actually that 20-year-old who knows where they're from, who looks like them, who speaks in the same manner that they're comfortable with. That kid has an unbelievable ability to communicate with, maybe even just in a manner as simple as being the way that he is. That's going to inspire and inspire that growth that we need to see. The work that our guys do over the summer is incredible. I often describe the collegiate position as being a single father of 12. And that's, I think, very much what it is for 3 weeks. And they are the backbone of our program, along with our counselors, and during the year, our mentors. And I think that's really where the most growth happens on the part of REACH students, not just as students, but as people.
You make a great point about REACH alumni being able to talk to kind of their younger brothers, right? Figuratively speaking, very directly and really make an impact on them. I think that's extremely powerful. And I know you guys did earlier this month an event with REACH alumni, some of whom are now out in the workforce, and you're trying to leverage them as mentors. Can you say a little bit about that alumni community of guys that are now out of college that came through REACH and what their connection to one another and the program is like?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be able to see this cohort of young men, really, who are really not much younger than I am, who are out there in the world doing exciting things. We've got people in law school, we've got people becoming doctors, we've got people who are working at successful businesses, and to kind of see them, how excited they are to come together. It kind of highlights, again, that intensity of that residential experience, that they went through this experience 12, 13, 14 years ago, and it's still like they are bonded because of that. And I think a lot of people have that experience in their high school and in their college, but to say you had that experience in a middle school summer program is pretty remarkable. I don't think there are a lot of people who are eagerly, changing their plans on a Friday night to get together with their summer camp buddies from the 7th grade. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but at least I am. I'm not. So you see both the kind of brotherhood that exists, and the one thing that I've been struck by in talking to REACH alumni is kind of the hunger that exists in this population to mentor and to serve as guides for, as you said, sort of their younger brothers and the ones that follow in their path. I think there's a desire to, on that educational access question, on making these schools where everybody has a seat at the table, so to speak, and there's real hunger in the community to continue to support in whatever way they can future REACH students and make sure that they're successful at each of our partner schools.
Yeah, that's all super. So shifting gears just a little bit, you mentioned earlier that 10 years ago, REACH did their own kind of strategic planning process, and that led to the creation of the Dean of Mathematics role. I know that you were very involved 2 years ago when Regis went through a strategic planning process to think about everything that we do at the high school strategically. I know that you were a key player in the REACH task team, and I'm curious to hear a little bit about that planning process and how it impacted your own thinking about REACH, and also how the program is now moving forward on executing and implementing some of the initiatives identified in that plan that directly relate to the program.
Yeah, I mean, so we came up as a task team with, after a series of great conversations, and I think a lot of, for me, really helpful outside perspective. It's easy when you're kind of on the inside to identify where a few issues are, and one thing that was nice about speaking with not total community outsiders, these folks were connected to the Regis community, but they were education outsiders, and I think they provided a lot of helpful input, especially when it comes to where do we get our students and what is our process of evaluating whether we are successful or not look like. So we came away with 4 kind of big initiatives that we wanted to think about. One of them was to kind of flip the script a little bit and not think about REACH as a program where we're only trying to get students to high school, but to think about REACH as a program where we try to get students to high school and then through high school as successfully as possible. So to almost think about it less as a 3-year program and more as a 7-year program and then an 11-year program, right? I think I'm doing my math right. So we hired an additional staff member, a director of graduate support, Russell Quinones, who actually served as a collegian for a long time when he was in college and a counselor before that. And his addition to the team has been fantastic, not just because he's super competent and passionate about what he does, but because I really think that was a need. We really needed, at Regis to see someone on the ground who was going to be in the ear of REACH guys, supporting them, being their cheerleader, but also another source of advice, sort of another overlapping safety net. And we think that's made a real difference for our high schoolers here at Regis. We think it's made a difference for our alumni community to have someone who's specifically addressing their needs. I think previously that used to fall on the director, and I'm kind of grateful that I can have someone on my staff who's dedicated to that issue. So that's been a big step for us. Another thing we identified was continuing to think about our curriculum and how we can make even more gains. I think if we look at our testing evidence, there's a lot of really impressive results. We know that the population we serve is often a population that doesn't speak English at home. I don't think about that from a deficit mindset, but I also have to be real and recognize that it's going to affect not only their entrance exam performance, but it's also going to affect their actual performance in an English-driven curriculum here at Regis, or whether it be at Xavier or Florida Prep. So we've thought about, okay, what can we do to adjust our English curriculum, our English language arts curriculum, all of our classes to better support our students as readers and writers. How can we spiral our instruction a little bit more effectively so that the gains that we're making during the summer are actually durable gains, because it's really easy in education to make a ton of progress and then for it to dissipate once they return to their regular schools. How can we better weave what we do in the summers into what happens on REACH Saturdays? And how can we continually make that as rigorous an experience as possible, so that we're not under-challenging the guys who are going to end up solidly in their classes at our partner schools. I think those are really ongoing struggles, but I think we've made a lot of progress. We've hired a new Dean of English Language Arts, Ms. Shannon Dye, and I think she's doing a great job so far, kind of really taking a hard look at our curriculum and starting to think about how we can better leverage the time that we have. Yeah.
That is all very exciting.
Yeah.
Certainly REACH has a very impressive track record, and it sounds to me like the future is bright.
Yeah, we got a lot going on. Still thinking about, as I said, the other initiatives were that fourth summer and thinking about recruiting and admissions. I could talk for another half hour about that. There's always more work to do. We're not a startup anymore, but we're still, it's a small enough organization. We're a team of 5 that change is exciting, and the possibility of doing our work in a more effective way is exciting. And I think the other thing too is that our work is challenging. If you look at the national stats on students from lower income backgrounds and students of color, it's often very depressing. And so, our work is cut out for us. And so that I think is really motivating. We know that there's a need for the work that we need to do. And we know that it works, the system that we have works. So we just have to kind of make sure that all of our systems are operating, but always thinking about, okay, how can we push this to the next level? Because we do think there is another level we can get to out there.
Open to growth, just like you said, right? Being a growth mindset for the program
So
too.
the program, I actually think this is the strength of our program, is that we are growth oriented about our own practice.
Excellent, and we'll talk about recruiting during our next sit down.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that there's a lot to be said about how to recruit the best and brightest fifth graders for the program.
I will say this quickly, I am convinced that there is a REACH kid in every public school in New York, and the question is finding them. There are 1 million students in New York City. We have 54 candidates. And not all of them are 5th grade Catholic boys, I know that, but there are more out there than we're finding. And it's a question of, okay, what practices can we institute that are cost effective and that will actually bear fruit? And I think that's I don't want to say it's untapped, because we're doing a lot of great work in that area already, but it's just such a rich area.
You get 300 nominations a year, is that right?
Yeah, well,
for fifth
we're a week
graders?
away from the deadline. We already have over 300 nominations.
Wow.
I think we're on pace to set a record for this year, but I probably shouldn't say that on camera.
Got it. Excellent. So one thing that I think is really special about REACH, and most people might not know about it, is how closely you and your team work not just with students, but with their families and with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
If you could tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how that's evolved for you over your time in the program, as Math Dean and now as director, I think people would enjoy hearing a little bit about that family interaction as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes on with the families. This past Saturday, I spent probably about 7 hours doing individual conferences with families and with 2 other staff members. We spoke to, I think it was 92 6th and 7th grade families, and we'll follow up with the other 8, very shortly thereafter. When I started, I was very much a teacher and a curriculum designer, and over time, as I got a little older, I was 21 when I started. I don't think they wanted me working with families right away. I got a chance to have more individual conversations. So you're calling a family in, and it's not because they're in trouble. You're trying to share feedback with them in a really productive way. And it's more than a traditional parent-teacher conference. We're going over test scores. We're going over these detailed narrative evaluations. We're really trying to paint the families sort of a holistic picture of who their child is as a student and as a leader, and understanding that leader in the context of kind of the 5 pillars of Jesuit education. And we're trying to get the families on board, and they are on board. We're trying to work with the families and learn information from them about how we as a team can get this kid to where he needs to get over the next 2 years. And to kind of make the gains that we make, that's the kind of work you have to do. You have to put that amount of time in with each family, and your follow-up conversations as need be. And those conversations can be really tricky, because these young men and their families have been successful wherever they are. That's That's why they're in the REACH program. But you're kind of trying to say, actually, there's another world out there. There are these amazing schools, and we think you have the capability of being there, and you're on track, but it's going to be a long road. And we know that you're going to need to grow as a reader. You're going to need to take that 10 minutes that you're reading every night and make it 30, right? You're going to need to take that 95 that you have in math at St. Brendan's, and we're going to make it a 99. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use your planner. We're going to organize, some separate homework time for you every night. Whatever it is, each case is different. It's really about knowing the family and meeting them where they are. In some cases, it's really just about helping this family that, I think there's sort of a myth that families from underserved backgrounds don't care about education or don't value education. I've never experienced that in the work that I do, but I do meet families that aren't equipped. Maybe it's because they don't speak English very well, or because the system they know is in another hemisphere. And so you're really trying to equip these families with the tools that they will need to navigate these complex systems. I mean, the American educational system, for better or for worse, is incredibly complicated, especially in New York. And so you're really trying to give them the tools that they will need, while assuring them that you will be alongside them the whole way to kind of navigate that landscape. Yeah.
It really is inspiring work that you guys do with families, and I think you've even gone to learn Spanish on your own, right? To be able to communicate better with those families and speak that primarily.
And I'm not fluent, but I spoke for about maybe 3 hours in Spanish on Saturday, and sometimes I surprise myself when that happens. My wife and I went to Costa Rica for a couple weeks to do some immersion, and I audited a few classes here at Regis, did a lot of legwork to try to make that happen. I definitely, I don't want to say regret, but I definitely wonder why I took German in high school. When I knew I wanted to be a teacher, I probably, could have gone back in time on that one. But yeah, no, and the families appreciate it. Sometimes I run into an accent that I struggle with, and sometimes I can't express an idea, but I think they appreciate the effort, and we have 2 other staff members who are fluent in Spanish, and so can do the lifting that I can't do, which is really good. But even for folks that aren't, I think they appreciate the attitude of meeting them where they are.
Agreed. I think it's a real sign of how much the program cares, not only for the students, but the families and the relationship with them.
Yeah, we're a family program. Our director of recruiting says that a lot, and he's really great about kind of on the ground level building those relationships. Yeah.
So Doug, this has been great. There's so much more we could talk about, including but not limited to the coal mine tour in Scranton, the swim test at Scranton, the hike.
So I actually can't swim, you know that?
I did not know that.
I'm a very weak swimmer. Yeah.
So you cannot pass the swim test.
Me being the proctor of the swim test is super ironic.
Fortunately, there's a lifeguard.
Yeah, I'm not the lifeguard. I'm just the decider of, or the order maker. That's not the right phrase. But.
Sure. No, there's a lot that goes into the camp. The last thing I want to ask you about is your favorite REACH story, in part because one of my favorite stories from my time as an educator is on Setup Day 2017, when you and I drove the U-Haul from here to Scranton, and then proceeded to set up the whole camp, and ended up it was 10 p.m. at the earliest in a Walmart outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania, shopping for all the other items that were needed.
I remember John Hannon?
And picking up John Hannon in the middle of it. Yeah, it was really a wild day. I just look at that day as one where I've worked probably the hardest and felt most gratified by what we were up to, and it was all kinds of different stuff, right? Opening rooms and putting kids' names on them, and shopping for Band-Aids, and really just getting the camp ready for the kids to arrive, and then feeling very excited when the kids did arrive and everything went smoothly. So that's one of my favorite REACH stories among many, but I'm curious to know what your favorite story is.
I think I have to cheat and just name 2 categories of story. I'm not even going to name 2 stories, but 2 different categories of story. We're in high school admissions season right now, so I have kind of admissions on my mind. And so I think back to maybe 9 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, when a young man who's now in college, he ended up at Loyola, his name's Ernest. He was accepted into the REACH program, and after finding out that he was accepted to the REACH program, he proceeded to call the director of admissions of the REACH program, Brian Daly, to inform Brian Daly that he had been accepted to the REACH program, as if we didn't know. And it was just this incredibly sweet moment where it was profound, because you realize as a team, he did. He really did make it, and he's kind of made it into this whole network that's gonna, as long as he keeps working hard, it's gonna set him up, right? And I don't even know how aware he was in that moment of kind of the level to which he had made it. And we just had a family that got into, the kid was just accepted to Regis, and they did a video film of their acceptance to Regis, like it was like a college signing day or something like that. And it was just incredibly sweet to see the kid and the family kind of going nuts and celebrating. So that kind of bookend jumped out to me. The other thing that just jumped out to me was broken bones, which is a weird thing to say, is one of my favorite, but actually weirdly the moments where I've been almost most proud of the program and most impressed by the level of commitment our families show is when kids are injured or hurt. And I have never had a kid get injured and the family say, okay, well, he's gonna have to withdraw from the program. Instead, every time, and I don't want to make it seem like kids are breaking bones left and right at the REACH program, but it does happen. And I'm remembering a particular instance where a kid broke his arm. We actually spent a whole night with him at the hospital. That's a whole other story. We called up the family and we were like, you know, if he wants to spend a couple days at home, that would be understandable. And they said, no, he broke his left hand, he's a righty, he's here to do a job, there's no reason he can't do it. And it's just like, you know, moments like that where you're like, well, you know, it's a pleasure working 18 hours for a family like that. You know, I think I've had that happen like 3 or 4 times, different digits and different bones. But I find it just incredibly inspirational.
That's an incredible testament to that young man's commitment and his family's commitment to his academic work and his leadership development at the camp. And that's all wonderful. And I think of Ernest. I remember walking down 83rd Street last year as Loyola High School graduation was getting out.
Yeah.
And I knew Ernest and I wanted to shake his hand. And he had so many people coming up to him that I was like last in the receiving line. So Ernest really had made it. And those stories of families and students being excited about getting into REACH, getting into Regis, getting into college, it makes sense that that's what it's really all about. So thanks for sharing those stories with me, and thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you.